I think there is a deeper question. There is a decline of the big parties of centre-left and centre-right that dominated politics in the second half of the 20th century. Possibly the centre-left is having a rougher time at the moment than the centre-right, but this changes from year to year and country to country. Germany and Britain are the only two countries in Europe that have long-standing parties of the centre-right in a dominant position. Everywhere else the right is fragmented too. So there's a general issue there. And I think the general cause is the decline in the political salience of class and religion. These were the two great forces of social identity that formed the great parties of centre-right and centre-left. These have declined. The old classes of industrial society are declining in size. The new classes of post-industrial society have still not found a political identity. And in Europe, though not in the United States, religion is declining. So there's a general decline of these settled identities, and this means a fragmentation of parties. I think it follows fairly logically, and one probably should always have expected that it would happen. The second half of the 20th century was not cast in stone forevermore. There are, however, specific problems for the centre-left. First, and this is a cruel irony of history, that for several years in the 80s and the 90s, neoliberalism was riding high, achieved a widespread popularity, it seems, and Social Democrats were caught out by that. They then ran very quickly to catch up and to turn themselves into neoliberals. And then what happens? 2008, a crash of neoliberalism. But Social Democrats could not inherit the political gain from that, because they were all on the same side. And it has therefore been left to new parties to take the gain from 2008. Partly parties on the left, on the further left, the Linken in Germany, Syriza in Greece, Podemos in Spain, and other movements. But more important, on the extreme populist xenophobic right. And that is then the third force that we have to talk about, the rise of xenophobia and right-wing populism. Going back to a politics of the left that suited industrial society does not make much sense if we are living in a post-industrial society. We have a different kind of working person now. They do not so much work in the large factory blocks that form the basis of traditional socialism. They have insecurities. There are especially young people working in very insecure temporary posts with very poor prospects. Or people even in very good jobs, increasingly under a managerial control that becomes more sophisticated all the time with digitalization. So there is still a lot of work to do representing workers, representing employee interests, representing the need for more equality and less inequality, because society is becoming more unequal. But this cannot be done by just going back to the politics of the 1970s. It needs forming new ideas for new kinds of politics that are critical of neoliberalism, but find a new way forward. And I think in Britain that actually the group around Jeremy Corbyn, which starts as a back to the 70s part of movement, a kind of nostalgia part of movement, is moving on in that way. Actually, I think they're beginning to find new ways of forming a left-wing agenda. It's the early stages yet and uncertain, but they're showing signs of trying to do that. I think one can understand easily why it's happened. One has a combination of economic globalization, which people, especially after 2008, are feeling uncomfortable about. There has been the enormous waves of refugees coming from the Arab countries and from North Africa, happening at exactly the time when a very, very small number of Islamic people are turning to terrorism in Western countries. And we cannot deny that this has happened. It may be tiny, but just one bomb can affect public opinion in a way that no other political issue will for months on end. So it's easy to understand why it's happening. Also, I think one can understand why it has such an immediate political effect. If class and religion have declined as bases of political identity, what is left for ordinary people? How do they identify to the political world outside their own sphere? And nation is there. Nation as a social identity that's also political. And all these forces around them are reinforcing nation. So this is extremely powerful. On the other hand, it is a reaction that is going nowhere, because we will increasingly live in a globalized world. That we're increasingly living in a world where we're interdependent. You can't take out a country in the way Donald Trump is trying to do. Take it, even something as large as the United States. You can't take it out of relations with other people. You can't do, as the British are trying to do, take Britain out of Europe into a kind of imperial nostalgia, in fact. We are living in a world of global interdependence, which means our politics has to reach up to that level. So we need more transnational action, more international cooperation, more multiculturalism. And so there may be immediate political gains by following right-wing populism, but it's a path that leads to only one place, and that is increasing intolerance of foreigners, ethnic minorities, social minorities, that can't solve any real problems because these people are not actually the cause of the problem.